106.5 FM and online. It's the After 5 Guest with Wynne Thomas.
And time now for my After 5 guest. I'm delighted to be joined by Lt.Col Graham Jones, retired MBE. He was a royal contributor to the suggestions for Her Majesty the Queen's funeral. Graham, thanks for your company this afternoon.
Wynne, thank you very much. How's Wales today?
Oh, a bit blustery. It's sunny now and again, and then rainy a bit as well, Graham, yes.
Okay, my brother lives in Glanyeravon in Clwyd.
Oh, right, okay. He knows all about the weather then, doesn't he? Yes.
He knows all about the weather, yeah.
Can I start by asking you, you must be very satisfied with how well the band music went during the funeral service?
Yes, I was. And it's interesting when you spend so many years in the planning, and then obviously the occasion happens and I'd already retired. So I'm looking at the unfolding plan. And that was interesting. But I thought the bands were outstanding. They played superbly. And I think they did the nation proud.
So how was Her Majesty's funeral planned then? How do you say there's years in the planning? How did the planning go?
Well, it's kind of, I'd say it's more tweaking than planning. Right. Remember that we're known as the best in the world at state ceremonial.
Yes.
And that best in the world in state ceremonial comes from a golden thread of history, heritage and tradition. And we have to go back to February 1901 to Queen Victoria's funeral. The whole world changed because of the Industrial Revolution. And as we went through the Industrial Revolution, musical instruments changed, particularly the brass instruments. And of course, in Wales, with all the wonderful, famous brass bands you've got there, I'm sure everybody knows about it. Mm-hmm. So pistons arrived, and that changed the whole way we could do things. So then people started to orchestrate, put into band terms, music that was beforehand played by orchestras, and funeral marches were one of the idioms that was used. And Queen Victoria requested two marches for her funeral, which was the Beethoven Funeral March and the Chopin Funeral March. So they were used for the very first time. And then, of course, we then went through the three kings and their funerals, and then after that we had Winston Churchill's funeral and, of course, the Queen Mother's funeral. And the list of music grew through the years until we've now got a fine selection of some incredibly powerful music that can be used on state ceremonial funerals.
So you could say that is the process then of music being selected for the actual funeral. That's sort of process you just spoke about.
Yeah, that is the process. So what we would do is we'd update that process as we're going through and say, let's have a look at how we did it last time. Mm-hmm. Is there anything that we need to be better, stronger, the music? Does it fit at the tempo that we need to? Remember, you've got naval ratings who are dragging the gun carriage.
Yeah.
The pace, and this is the critical thing, and you look at this, and lots of people have asked me, particularly American music directors, and they're saying, how does this happen, Graham? How does that whole parade seem to be in sync? That's impossible. No, it's not, because the whole thing is driven by the time beater. The time beater is actually the bass drummer.
Right.
And the bass drummer, he sticks rigidly at 75 beats per minute, and the pace is 30 inches. That's the steps are taken at 30-inch steps. Now, when I say 75, I mean exactly 75 beats per minute. It's such an arduous job. Imagine 45 minutes of beating 75 beats per minute. And what happens is the bass drummers, they actually wrap their fingers, they take their fingers up, because otherwise they blister. It's that, you're beating it at fortissimo all the time to keep all the parade absolutely rigidly in step.
Now, I may be wrong, Graham, but I think it's the first time I've ever seen them march down the long walk. Was that something as well that you had to plan, or had you already done it?
No, because you haven't seen it before. Because the last time it was done was actually George VI's funeral. And if I recall, I don't think the ceremonial in Windsor was filmed. I think it was just the main parade in London. So this is the first time that we've actually seen that. Quite spectacular as well, I might admit.
Yeah, but it was such a narrow road, isn't it, for a band, and also, of course, the crowd is so close to them. It was an incredible experience that they did that, wasn't it?
It is. The difficulty bit is if you can now put yourself at the top of the long walk, and you see that it goes down, and then it rises up to the castle.
Yeah.
And it's quite a steep rise up to the castle. And at that particular point, there's also like a 5-bar gate near enough. And suddenly, you've got to narrow. So all the servicemen have got to have a method so they can fall in behind each other to become narrow, to go through the gated area, and then to reform wide, ready to go through up to the castle. And that takes a lot of rehearsal.
So you talk about this massive amount of music you already had since Victoria's time. So did you go for pieces that people would recognise, something like Beethoven's Funeral Marches 1 and 2? Was that something you sort of pick some music people know?
Actually, the marches that we used were Beethoven's Marches 1, 2 and 3.
Well, sorry, I missed the third one. Okay.
Yeah, so that's okay. I'm not correcting you, don't worry. And we've got Chopin.
Yeah.
And also we had the Mendelssohn.
Yeah.
As well.
So there were people knew those pieces, didn't they? Because they've been used before, haven't they?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, the one that goes dum dum da da dee da da.
Oh yes.
Dee, da. Yeah, everybody knows it.
Yeah.
Everybody knows it.
So lots of preparation and for all those different types of bands, and wasn't it? A lot of rehearsals and things like that, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, I think let me explain it this way to you.
Mm-hmm.
If you think of the whole of what you saw, if you think of it now as a jigsaw puzzle. And what you're seeing is the completed puzzle. But a puzzle is made up of the component parts, and each component part is as equally as important as the piece next to it, because if they don't fit, it doesn't work. So how this works, let's start with the bands first of all. You've got the bands, and you've got all the separate bands who are all over the country. You've got the pipes and drums, where you had, I think it was 8 bands, I think, were involved in that.
Yeah.
They all rehearse separately their music, and then they come together in what we politely call concentrations. So we start putting the bands together, and then you can see how the jigsaw is starting to build, and all the pieces of the puzzle are coming together. Whilst that part is being worked on, at the same time, you've got the pallbearers. They're training and practicing their bit, other pieces of the puzzle. You've then got, of course, the gun carriage and the Royal Navy putting together their pieces of the puzzle. You've then got all the streetliners that you saw lining them out. They've got a job to do. They've got to march into position. They've got to make sure they reverse their arms and do all the things that they need to do at the right time. Now, this is all being put together separately, and then we start to build, and we built into 3 concentrations, bigger concentrations. That was, we had the Army at Pirbright, and we had the Navy down in Portsmouth, and we had the Royal Air Force as well. They're at Norfolk. And they were all preparing as a unit. So now we've got bigger pieces of the puzzle to put together. The detail here is such that the road markings are placed in the barracks, and it's mapped out exactly to scale as it will be on the day, so that they can train and they can prepare on ground which will be exactly the same as when they do it. So now what we've now got the bands, and we've got the marching units. When the marching units are training on their own, they have a bass drummer with them who's beating 75 beats a minute. You see how the detail is here? And it all puts together, and it's layers of the jigsaw that all come together, and then you end up with what you saw on the television.
And the horses as well, are they in this as well?
Yeah, the horses, of course. Yeah. No, sorry, I forgot the horses. Sorry to the Household Cavalry Mounted and of course King's Troop, Royal Horse Artillery. They had a big part to play if you remember did you see that the very first procession that came out of Buckingham Palace?
Yes.
And you had the gun carriage, of course, with the coffin going to Westminster Hall, and you had the King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery. Imagine the responsibility of doing that. Yeah. And there was Captain Emily. I forgot her name now. Emily. Anyway, she was the commander of the King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery. What a job she had, and she did it absolutely perfectly. Just one other thing I'd like to say, Win, as well.
Yeah.
I was watching these fine musicians, and I was thinking of myself when I was a young child at school.
Yeah.
And it's so important that just to think for a minute that there's somebody on that. There are people on that parade, musicians, that 5, 6, 7 years ago they were practicing their hearts out in school to be the best they could be as players, and then they made a decision to join a military band. And the next thing, there they are on the biggest event the world has ever seen.
Yes, they were so young, weren't they? They were
absolutely. And, and I think they did a brilliant job, and it's testament to the hard work that goes in with music teachers, helping these people fulfill their dreams of being quality musicians. Really important, that.
So there we are, with the envy of so many countries in delivering such a wonderful state ceremonies. Did you, maybe it's my year, but with such a long procession, do you have to repeat some of those pieces as well?
It does repeat itself.
It does repeat itself.
But you have to remember this, that on a procession like this, the music moves with the bands. So if you start playing the Beethoven's Funeral March No. 1, at one point, by the time you get to playing the Funeral March No. 1 again, they're 3/4 of the way along the mall.
Yeah.
So the music is changing. For the people who are static, they're probably hearing different music all the time. So it's so it works from that perspective.
Plus, that's where television ruins it for all of us, really.
Yeah. And I actually don't think, Win, that anybody watching it on the television would have been conscious of a repetition of a particular march. So, because it actually becomes bigger. The event becomes bigger than that, doesn't it?
So let me just change the subject a little bit. You talked about these young people who were learning to play brass instruments when they were quite young to then become bandsmen. Did you always want to be a military musician?
I wanted to be a musician, and then very fortunately, I was at a school that was the heart of the brass band world, and I was brought up in the brass band world. And my music teacher did national service. And he said to me, Graham, I think you might not know about this, but let me introduce you to the world of military music. So I think this would suit you really well. So I did some research on it, and he helped me with that, and he persuaded me that that's what I should do. And from the age of 14, that's what I wanted to do.
And you went into the Guards then, and worked your way up, so to speak.
Yeah, well, I started off with the Royal Artillery. I was in the Royal Artillery band. And then after so long, I thought, okay, I'm a Lance Corporal or a Lance Bombardier in the Royal Artillery. I'm a Lance Bombardier. Where do I go next? And I thought, I really would like to be a conductor. How do I do that? So I went and talked to the bandmaster, and he said, okay, you need to do this. So I then started to study, and then I went to the Royal Military School of Music, graduated from there after a 3-year degree course, and became a bandmaster. And as a bandmaster with 16th, the Queen's Royal Lancers, and then you start working on the next ladder. So you start going up the steps of the ladder, and eventually you get the right qualifications to be commissioned. And then from being commissioned, then you take the steps of eventually coming to the state bands, which are the Guards bands, and the Household Cavalry Mounted Regiment in London. And I was privileged and honoured to become the Director of Music of the Coldsream Guards.
That's right.
Which I absolutely loved it. And then the icing on the cake was, for the last 4 years of my service, I was the Senior Director of Music of the Household Division, responsible for all state ceremonial music.
Wow, yeah, so you finished in 2012, 40 years of service, and ended up as Director of Music commanding the Coldsream Guards. And really, all that work that you sort of people put in is a tribute to the bandsmen who marched that day and played so well throughout that funeral. Absolutely wonderful, Graham.
It was. I was so thrilled for them, just to watch that and see how well they played and how well they held themselves. And thought that's everything there is down to all that work that they did as youngsters coming through school.
Well, thanks so much for being my After Five guest today. Thanks for spending the time this afternoon.
My pleasure, Win. Always good to talk to people in Wales.
Thank you very much indeed. We're going to play with a piece, actually, which is called National Emblem. So we'll play that
love it.
towards the end.
One of my favourite marches, by the way.
I thought it might be.
By a guy called Bidgood, I think, if I'm right.
I'm not sure who the composer was, but yes, it's, I think this is actually by the Coldsream, so I'll put that through for you. Thanks very much, Graham. Thank you.
Yeah.